let's talk about the fallout post-VAR, the call or non-call of the weekend Manchester City and Liverpool. Trent Alexander-Arnold, was it a handball or not? Well, the Premier League has weighed in with this statement to clarify. The VAR checked the penalty appeal for handball against Trent Alexander-Arnold and confirmed the on-field decision that it did not meet the considerations for a deliberate handball. Okay, so let's get some feedback from former Premier League referees. He's Mark Halsey. He says it was a penalty. I felt the right back had his right arm in an unnatural position, made himself bigger, and deliberately moved it out to stop the ball going to Raheem Sterling. In the Premier League statement, there was no mention of Bernardo Silva's accidental handball in the build-up, so presumably the Referees Association were happy with the City winger's actions. Mark Clattenburg has another opinion. No penalty, he says. Bernardo Silva's arm deflects the ball onto Alexander-Arnold, and that is why, for me, play should not be brought back. If Silva's arm doesn't divert the ball, then yes, I believe a penalty should have been awarded, as Alexander-Arnold's arm is in an unnatural position and he is using it to make himself bigger. Keith Hackett says penalty. So clearly we're not all in agreement. Sad to say, Mark is interpreting the law in his way. I disagree with his comments. Silva did not gain possession or control or score with his hand arm. Therefore, no offense. Distance from the deflection of 8.4 yards, which is pointed out on BBC TV, according to Hackett, is sufficient time for the defender to see the ball and react. Finally, Dermot Gallagher, well, you can see we're going back and forth. He says not a penalty. Michael Oliver will have communicated with the VAR that the ball came too quickly at Alexander-Arnold. If you asked 100 neutral football fans about the decision, you'd have a split vote. Even if the referees had come over to the pitch side monitor, which we know will never ever happen, he wouldn't have reversed the decision.
Well, Mike Riley, the head of the PGMOL, if I've got those letters in the right way, I don't particularly care if I have or not, but the head honcho, let's put it that way, has apparently doubled down in the last 24 hours on the monitors and all the other stuff and how they're applying the laws and the use of the technology. What Dermot's saying, I think, is wrong. If you ask most neutrals, I think most neutrals would say they thought it was a penalty. If you ask Liverpool fans, they would probably say no. But we're talking about a group here, so 4 people, one of them, Keith Hackett, has been finished a long, long time, but they're all FIFA or have been FIFA-accredited officials. They should know the laws of the game better than us, by the very nature of the job, right? They should know the intricacies of the laws better than anybody else. And here we have 4 of them can't agree.
Split down the middle.
Can't agree. Can't even agree. And one of the other points about this is the one thing that's muddy in this, the only thing that's muddy in this for me, don't know about anybody else, is the deflection of Bernardo Silva's hand, right? That's the only reason I can see for that penalty not being given. So if they're saying no, that only matters if it has a material effect on a goal being scored or it goes directly in off the hand, but it doesn't matter if it bounces off his hand and hits Trent Alexander-Arnold in the arm, that doesn't matter, then it's a penalty.
All right, Stevie, did that make any sense? That was very confusing. It did.
Absolutely.
Was that confusing?
No,
yeah, the whole thing is confusing.
How is it confusing?
Well,
he's basically, listen, and he was saying, Liverpool fans think it wasn't a penalty. Well, if you take away the fact that it hit Silva's arm, it's a penalty kick. His arm's away from his body.
Yeah, but that's the fact.
He's got more than enough time.
You can't take away the fact, Stevie.
Well, you can if it's not. Well, you can. It depends how the law is interpreted.
Is 8.4 yards enough?
No, that's not.
Absolutely.
That's I mean, Hackett has said that. He's saying that despite the deflection, 8.4 yards is enough to get your...
Listen. There is no argument, in my opinion. There is no argument to say that his arm is tucked in enough by his side. It's not. Right? It's not. It's out there, and it's much bigger than the silhouette, and the ball travels enough distance. The only grey area for me is the ball bouncing off Bernardo Silva's hand. And if they're saying that doesn't matter, then the argument is flawed.
They really look stupid if you try and tell me that Alexander-Arnold doing that and being that far away, if that's their excuse, then they're telling stories.
Don, I wonder what you make of this. Not just the call, but also all the confusion, the fallout over the last 36 hours.
Confusing. I think the fact that all the ex-Premier League referees can't agree and it split everyone on social media probably tells you it wasn't probably clear and obvious. Where I would agree with the boys is There was quite a bit of distance involved between ball and Trent Alexander's arm. Having said that, to throw another little spanner in the works, it was 8.4 yards, metres, whatever it was, but the fact that it took just over a second for that ball to travel there suggests that Trent probably couldn't get his arm out of the way. So I think it's one of them. If the referee on the pitch had to give a penalty, I think he would have stood by, and VAR would have stood by his decision. I thought it was a penalty. I didn't think it was particularly deliberate. I don't think there was any real intent there. But when you see the freeze frame again, which everything looks a little bit worse in a freeze frame in a slow motion, Alexander-Arnold's arm wasn't tucked in by his side. It was quite sort of protruding to his right-hand side. So he looked a little bit guilty. But having said that, you know, it is starting to get really difficult and all really confusing.
Just before we go to Gab quickly, we've got to get this terminology away, deliberate or intent, right? And they can put it in the laws all they want. 70, I'm guessing here, 90% of penalties are not deliberate or intentional, never have been. You look at them, you can go back and check. There are some, but most of them are not. That's just a nonsense terminology, deliberate and intent, because most of them are not.
All right. Gab, we're up here kind of yelling about VAR, but we have 4 Premier League officials, former Premier League officials, that can't agree. Is this a VAR problem or a law problem?
Well, it's not. First of all, it's not really four people who can't agree. It's 2 people who say it was a penalty. Clattenburg, who seems to be philosophically opposed and is simply wrong when he brings up Bernardo Silva, and Dermot Gallagher, who, if you listen to the whole thing he says, he sort of explains why it wasn't overturned, and why it couldn't have been overturned, and how good Michael Oliver's positioning was, and 50-50 and all this nonsense. He basically just sits on the fence effectively because he doesn't want to take a position, not for the first time. I think this is all really, really clear. And there's 2 parts of it. There's the part about why VAR didn't intervene and overturn Michael Oliver's call, or non-call in this case. And there's the issue of whether it was a penalty and why Oliver called it the way he did. You guys are right. But there are different things to consider here. One is obviously the position of his body, and does he make himself bigger? And then you can take, as mitigating factors, you can take, as we mentioned, the speed with which the ball travels, the distance it travels, and also whether there was an unexpected deflection and the impact that all these factors had. You take all those things together, and then the referee applies his experience, how he saw it, and the discretion. The worst thing we can do is say, oh my goodness, things have suddenly all gotten so confusing. No, it's still down to the referee's discretion. What we used to call common sense once in a while, or once upon a time rather, it still applies. These are simply guidelines that referees are told to consider, and then they go and they make their judgment. And I said last night, for me, it was a penalty. I can understand why, in the dynamic of the game, Oliver didn't give it. Is there enough for the VAR to overturn? Probably, given the candid way VAR has been introduced in England, and there's no on-field review, I can understand how the VAR official, who's a guy named Paul Tierney, who nobody's ever heard of, how that guy might be like, oh, gee, I can't overrule Oliver because he had such great placement on the pitch and whatever else. And in any case, he's not going to go see it on the on-field monitor. This is part of the problem. If Oliver goes to see it, maybe he changes his mind, maybe he doesn't. But at least we have some logic. We have some continuity to this. And we need to get rid of this idea that it's black and white. It's not. Discretion still exists in the game of football. And there's too many people out there talking about this stuff as if it were black and white. And frankly, they have no idea what's going on. Not you guys.
Gab, on yesterday's show, you made the point that effectively this might have been a penalty in Champions League or in another league across Europe. Michael Oliver refs Champions League, right? So is he officiating then differently in Champions League versus the Premier League? I mean, that struck me, that stood out to me from yesterday's show.
I think he does, actually.
I mean, is that acceptable?
I don't think there's any question. Sorry?
Is that acceptable to call a game differently? Are the rules different?
Well, yeah, because when he referees in England, he's employed by the PGMOL. And when he's referees in the Champions League, he's employed by UEFA. They're assessed differently. Here in England, they've long had a looser standard, a tougher standard to award handball penalties historically, and clearly that's one of the things that they look at. Look, I mean, this might have been a penalty, and he might not have called this in a Champions League game, and the assessor might have marked him down because of it. I honestly don't know. But I think there's no question. All you have to do is watch Champions League football and watch the Premier League, and you realize that when it comes to these sorts of calls, they're often called differently between the two countries, between two competitions, despite the fact that they're trying to create more consistency across both.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN Plus.